Thank you so much for joining BigTent. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I'm the board president of BigTent USA. At BigTent USA, we are steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts, guidance, and calls to action so you can become a stronger, more effective advocate for our country. So we are very excited and honored to welcome a trifecta of amazing women in journalism, Judy Woodruff, Tara McGowan, and Rachel Janfaza. Judy Woodruff is the senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour after serving for 11 years as its anchor and managing editor. She has covered politics and other news for over 4 decades at CNN, NBC, and PBS. And in 2023 and 24, she undertook a reporting project, America at a Crossroads, to better understand the country's political divide. And we'll get to hear more about that work tonight. Judy is the recipient of many prestigious awards and the recipient of more than 25 honorary degrees and an icon to many of us on the call. Tara McGowan is the founder and publisher of Courier Newsroom and CEO of Good Information, Inc., a civic incubator that invests in immediate solutions to counter disinformation online. Recognizing the need for new media infrastructure that deliberately reaches and informs the consumers across the country who are most susceptible to being targeted with disinformation online, she founded Courier in 2019. Courier is a network of state and local newsrooms that deliver factual, cultural, and relevant news through a pro-democracy lens to communities who have been left behind by traditional media and paywalls directly to their social media feeds and inboxes. And joining us, the youngest member of this trifecta is Rachel Janfaza. She is the founder of the Up and Up, a newsletter about young voters, and a consultant on youth civic engagement and media strategy. A member of Generation Z herself, she is laser focused on the cohort's civic attitude and has convened listening sessions with hundreds of young people across the country. Her written work has been featured in the New York Times, on CNN, the Free Press, Glamour, Political Magazine, Teen Vogue, Vogue, Elle, Cosmo, and Bustle. So with that, I'm going to turn the call over to Judy, Rachel, and Tara. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kitty, for having us in BigTent. We are so grateful to be able to have this conversation. And personally, I'm honored to be here with these 2 incredible women today. So thank you both so much for this opportunity. To start with a very big question, we're going to get to the meat of what we're talking about quickly. I'm curious what you each see as the root causes of the current media crisis that we're facing and how we got here.
Well, I'm glad to start. As I start to say, I'm the geezer in this group. Very, very glad to be representing the older generation and delighted to be with these 2 extraordinarily talented and impressive young women, Tara and Rachel. I'll just give you my quick take on this, Rachel, and that is that for years and decades, the media chugged along, at least in the last century, attempting to cover news straight, didn't cover it completely, didn't cover everybody and everything that was going on, but the modus operandi was, we're going to try to cover it as straight as we can, and we'll do it in a very straightforward way. And at some point along the way, the business model, certainly for newspapers, hit a brick wall. A lot of it had to do with the internet. People found they could get their news for free, and they stopped subscribing. Advertisers decided there were other ways they could get the word out about their products. There's bigger questions here about what was happening with the overall economy and how advertising fit into it. But once that happened, once newspapers started collapsing, and now we've seen tens of thousands of them bite the dust. Newspaper reporters have gone away in droves. We have seen the traditional model of reporting, which was at the heart of it in print media, just take a big hit. Television has taken its own hit now with more technology, more advances in technology, which in many ways bring us more information, but they also do in many ways, the old model. So it's been decades in the making. But we are still watching a lot of turmoil. It's by no means over. I think we are still in the middle of an enormous just transition, change, unsettled times for all of us in traditional media.
Yeah, I would just add, and I'm so honored to be here with one of my journalism heroes, Judy. So it's a real pleasure, and Rachel, who I have gotten the chance to work with and get to know. So this is really exciting, and to be with all of you who are here. The only thing I want to add to what Judy mentioned is just a finer point on regulation of media and the deregulation of media, and the lack of regulation on technology. So everything Judy mentioned, a lot of that was accelerated or caused by big tech companies that came on the scene, right, and completely transformed our relationship to information and information consumption and distribution with platforms like Google and different search engines and social media. And to this day, there has never been one single piece of legislation passed and signed into law to regulate big tech. And big tech now own all of the mass media distribution channels. A study just recently came out that social media has now surpassed television and other medium for the first time for where the majority of Americans get their news today. And the way content is distributed on those channels and what content gets distributed or lifted up to larger audiences is determined by algorithms that are really a black box. Nobody can see them, but the people that are coding them in these companies now. And when these social media platforms came on the scene, they had a good faith posture about really rewarding and platforming really good quality, verifiable journalism and media publishers. They were throwing millions of dollars at programs to be able to bolster local news because they knew that they were responsible for the cannibalization of the traditional advertising model that supported journalism in this country. So they were trying to do a lot of good faith work to be able to lift up good quality news and information on the news feeds of platforms like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and things of that nature. And then what happened over time is that they increased their own self-regulation after the 2016 election and a lot of Russian interference and disinformation. We all know all of those stories. But then what happened is that they rolled back all of their self-regulation and they eliminated all of their programs to support news and journalism on their platforms. And now all of that money, some of which is coming back to some media companies, is all about feeding AI, language learning models. And so tech has been the real, if you can point to one culprit for how we're in this really fractured media environment with so much mis and disinformation and so little ability to get good information in front of people. It is because there is no regulation on these companies.
Thank you both so much. And I think, Tara, to your point, it's not just, I focus on young people. It's not just young people who are getting their news on social media. It's everyone. And the role that the tech companies play in that distribution is massive. I also think pointing out that when I talk to young people, they oftentimes, and this leads into my next question, tell me that they don't really trust anyone at all. And a lot of that is because of rhetoric that has been spewed, but also there's just so many different avenues of where they can get their news and information that they're not sure who the arbiter of truth really is, if there is one. So with that, for years, Trump, though it's not just the president, it's other politicians too, and other people online as well, have repeatedly branded the press as the quote enemy of the people. I'm curious from your perspective, what lasting damage you think that rhetoric and tone has done to traditional journalism, and how do we begin to repair trust in journalism?
Well, you're right, Rachel. It has been around. It's certainly, we certainly experience it now with President Trump, but it goes back, I think, of Spiro Agnew, who was Richard Nixon's vice president, who talked about the nattering nabobs of negativism. He was, of course, a Republican. He was reflecting news that he didn't like and that President Nixon didn't like. It is a thread that has run through American politics for some time. Democrats are even known to criticize reporters and the press when they don't like what's being written and what's being reported. But that has clearly contributed to the lack of, or to the lessening of trust in the media. But I will say, and I don't know if we'll have time to get to this. I mean, we're going to be talking about the forces that are out there that have affected the press. We in the press have not been perfect. I mean, we have clearly made mistakes. I mentioned the press of 50, 60, 70 years ago. It was people say a straight press. We cover the news straight, straight ahead, but we didn't cover everybody in the country. Where there were huge swaths of the American public who were left out of coverage for the longest time, whether initially it was women, it was minorities, it was blacks, it was Native Americans, and the list goes on. Poor people, I mean, have been left out of coverage. Only recently are we seeing more robust coverage. I still wouldn't argue that we're doing the job that we should be doing. People with disabilities, for example, there was no coverage of that. So the press has not been perfect. We've made mistakes, but do we deserve the epithet that I guess President Trump has thrown out there, that we're the enemies of the American people? Absolutely not. And that has clearly done damage. People have adopted that view, and we are going to have to work our way out of this, and it's going to take time.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that, it didn't start with Trump, certainly, as Judy mentioned, but also undermining the media and verifiable sources of facts and truth is core to the authoritarian playbook. Trust no one but me, right? To become an authoritarian leader, a cult leader. And I think Trump has been wildly successful with the MAGA base. It's actually interesting we're talking this week because we're starting to see one of the biggest fissures in the MAGA base against Trump with the Epstein news out of the administration, that there was no client list because that was actually a huge promise that Trump made to his base, and really driven by conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. And now that they've come out, his administration, with some of the biggest conspiracy theorists that were spreading theories about Epstein, and the client list at the top of the FBI with Kash Patel now, there is actually, it's one of the, I would be interested if Judy has other examples, but from my observation, it's one of the first time we've really started to see a lot of really strong, deep, loyal supporters of Trump question the honesty and integrity of his promises because of this, which is, of all the issues, right? I'm sure all of us are like, this is the one. But it is interesting because he has created this enormous base of support based on the belief that you can't trust anyone but him or his allies. And it's very hard to break that bond he's created with his audiences. But we have seen this throughout history and around the world. This is what happened in Turkey and Hungary as well. And so it is a real problem. And to the second part of your question, Rachel, about how do we restore trust, that's the most important thing, because it is exacerbated. This mistrust in media is exacerbated by the absolutely kind of chaotic, decentralized, saturated information environment we live in, and the ability to self-select. And I also have a bit of a theory that, because the media didn't always get it right when it was centralized and smaller, and there were fewer arbiters of truth, and they didn't represent all communities or all topics and issues, that now today, because media is so democratized, people really don't trust you as much if you don't tell them what you stand for. If you say you don't stand for anything, I mean, how do people know how to trust you? So, I mean, this is certainly a posture we've taken at Courier, is that we believe transparency is more important than objectivity. Being really transparent about our point of view. I don't believe all journalism needs to be advocacy or solutions journalism. My media diet starts with Morning Edition on my local NPR in Rhode Island every single morning. But I know that that's not the case for millions and millions of Americans who just get their news on social media. And so I do think it's also what has led to the enormous rise, which I know we're going to talk about the creator industry and more people getting their news from individuals who are not trained journalists, which is that is complicated and troubling in certain ways, but it's because they trust them. They feel like they've been let into their lives and their homes. And so I really do believe, and Judy, you are an example of this and a living legend for it. You know, it's so much more about you than just the brand. People trust PBS, but it's because you have come into their home every night, right? And it's why we're seeing also so many legacy media journalists leave and start their own Substacks, like you have, Rachel, and things of that nature, because it's actually really about the relationship, the parasocial relationship reporters and creators can have with their audiences, because trust is really built through individuals. So I do think that we are seeing trust be rebuilt. It's just in very different ways and spaces than what trust in media used to look like.
I will just say that that change is happening, as Tara describes it. It is not the model that I was taught, as a young journalist. It was, the first big advice I got from my producer when I started in local television news in Atlanta, CBS station. His advice was, Judy, nobody gives a damn what Judy Woodruff thinks. You're supposed to go out there, cover the story, take a lot of notes, come back and tell us what happened, and that's all. That's your job. And it's today, I think, I mean, Tara, you have a point. People do look more and more to journalists to reveal what we really, really think, even if that's not anything we've ever felt comfortable doing.
I was also taught that in journalism school in 2004. So I think it's still being taught. It's hard to keep that going and earn the audience.
Right. And it's taught, but there's a discrepancy in sort of there's trade by trade journalists who are being taught this in school, and then there's creators who don't necessarily go through that same process. And these are very conflicting and in tension with one another. But we care what you think, Judy. And I think everyone on this call does as well. So thank you for sharing it with us. When it comes to, Tara, you mentioned the creator economy and the trust that is built up. There was a massive conversation after the 2024 election about the success that right-wing media had in creating a very powerful, coordinated messaging machine that really blends culture with politics and shapes the national narrative. And even outside of conservative circles. And there are so many people, young people who feel politically homeless, who just felt like someone was speaking to them and inviting them into the conversation. Why hasn't the pro-democracy movement or mainstream media ecosystem been able to match that scale and level of influence?
So I think that there's a few pieces to this. So one, I think that there's no mainstream media anymore, right? What used to be mainstream now reaches much smaller audiences than some TikTok creators today. And so that's why I tend to refer to it as traditional or legacy media. But legacy media was put in a defensive posture by right-wing media, right? Right-wing media was created because a lot of folks on the right believed that the entire traditional legacy media ecosystem was liberal, right? They called it the liberal media. They still do. And so legacy media, like the New York Times, Washington Post, PBS, what have you, I mean, I think that there was a increased pressure to show that you are giving equal weight and time to both sides of an issue, both political sides of an issue and voices, but with less and less accountability over if they were telling the truth, right? And I think that really was one of the most problematic decisions certain newsrooms and publishers and editors made was to give, to actually preserve access and respect and sources with folks on the right, even if they would just literally go on their programming and tout lies. And that really discredited a lot of journalists and media, I think, for doing that. And also it weakened their impact because no longer were they the arbiters of truth. They were just platforming both political sides of the issue. And I'm not saying that Democrats were perfect at all. I agree fully with Judy that plenty of Democrats have done that. I don't think that they lie as often. I think the numbers are just there. We know the unprecedented number of lies Trump and his administration and his first administration told. But they're certainly interested in getting their version of the story across and controlling the message. But they never felt the need to build their own media infrastructure because they were more honest, even if they had ideology and opinions and an agenda, because they had legacy media that had such reach and power for so long. And so I think that, that's why they haven't been able to keep up. The reason why they're not investing in much in building their own media and investing in things like Courier now today is far more confusing to me, because the ecosystem is such that it is all essentially in some ways point of view or individual relationships to audiences and communities. And so you can't compete in the information ecosystem with advertising alone. And you certainly can't rely on earned or legacy media to carry your message. So that's why I created Courier. I didn't want a left version of Fox News or Breitbart by any means. I really did believe and still believe to this day that we can build absolutely transparent, values-driven media in line with our values, to never spread misinformation or disinformation, to never sow hate or division, which is a huge tactic of right-wing media and messaging in general. They want to leverage your fear and your anxiety. They do really, really despicable things to manipulate their audiences. We will never do anything of that nature whatsoever, but we're also not going to give equal airtime to what we believe are fascists or people who don't actually support the positions of the majority of Americans, not just liberal Americans. So, but that's sort of why I think that there isn't an equivalent to right-wing media. And also the last thing I would say is that their audience on the right, if you're thinking about it from a political perspective and building media for political gain, which is really what right-wing media exists for being able to build political power, they have a much more homogeneous base to reach. And they also really use a lot of cultural and social wedge issues to put Democrats on defense. And if you look at everybody else, let's call it, not just Democrats, but the whole pro-democracy movement, folks that want independent and press in America and they want democracy, that's a much, much more diverse melting pot, right? That is representative of the country. And so there isn't a single solution, a media solution for everybody else. It's going to take a really, really diversified, vibrant ecosystem of media buy-in for the communities that Judy mentioned earlier that have been underrepresented. We took the tact at Courier of building local network because where you live is so core to your identity, and it does override partisanship or ideology, and you are able to more likely build trust and respect with people you disagree with who lived in your communities. But also we need cultural media that is espousing these values. I would say the same thing that happened to legacy traditional media happened to Hollywood. The right is now investing so much more in cultural programming and entertainment programming. So the broader left needs to keep up, and they have been very slow to adapt.
I would just make 2 points. One is I have to take issue with Tara on the death of the mainstream or legacy media. We're still kicking at the NewsHour, and I think if you look around public radio, National Public Radio, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, I realize there are not nearly as many newspapers, news organizations as there were, but there are still organizations out there that are trying to cover the news from a, I don't know, centrist viewpoint. There's no such thing as a perfect center, but trying to tackle the news and tackle the whole story. The only other thing I'd say is that I think for right-wing media, it's just they create a simple narrative. It's not very complex, and I think for the rest of the media, news and information is complicated. It has layers, and if you want to get the whole story, you've got to. It takes time. It's not just a bumper sticker. It's not just a slogan on somebody's license tag. And I think that's one advantage that the right has taken advantage of.
I will say also that in my conversations I have with young people, there is still such an appetite for fact-driven news. And they've grown up as digital natives, understanding that so much of what they see online should not be trusted. And so they're very hungry for what they ask for as the facts. And I hope that gives an element of optimism for those who do believe in fact-based journalism, that there is still an appetite for that. It's just the medium needs to change or needs to evolve, and it has in many ways. And we see legacy organizations evolving the way that they deliver news and information too. Tara, you mentioned a piece about community and local news, and obviously, Judy, you have been instrumental in that as well. And most recently, Judy, you've spent time in the Rio Grande Valley for America at a Crossroads, and Courier, you've invested in building local trusted newsrooms there as well. And given the gravity of the current moment and all of the tragedy that is going on in that area, I'm curious what you both have learned about the stories that resonate with Texans in that area. And given this prime example of what's happening at this moment in time, what do you observe about the role that media plays or can fail to play in communities like these at times like these?
Yeah, I'll let Tara speak about the media piece of it. I will say that the reason we went to the Rio Grande Valley is we were curious to try to understand why the southernmost part of Texas, right on the border with Mexico, or right on the, at a place where you would think there would be strong support, continuing strong support for Democrats, which there has been for decades. 4 counties flipped completely and went from voting Democratic for decades to voting for Donald Trump, and we want to understand why that is. There was the same shift that we saw across the country, and we also wanted, as part of America at a Crossroads, to understand how are people living with that, because families are divided, neighbors are divided. We sat down with college students. We sat down with a father and son. The father has flipped and voted for Trump, and his son is very much an active Democrat, and they talked about their view of immigration and the economy and Donald Trump. And through these kinds of conversations, we hope we can begin to understand how it is that people are working their way through this time, which is painful for many families. I mean, when you have people who can't even sit down together over dinner, family dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, because they feel so differently. And that's what's happening now in places that didn't used to experience it. So that was a big part of the reason we went there. But I know Tara can speak to what's going on with the media.
Yeah, Courier Texas is our most recent newsroom, our 11th that we launched last year. We have it in two hubs right now, Dallas, Fort Worth, and we just launched Houston most recently, and it's going to expand to other places. And I was talking to some of my reporters there earlier today about this because it's been really fascinating. Courier Texas has grown the fastest organically of any of our newsrooms once we've launched them. And our hypothesis for why that is because, well, one, Texas is massive, and there really isn't very much local journalism, as Judy mentioned earlier, left in the country. There was a new study I saw today from Muckrack that's really big on the death of local news in America, with a lot of new data. But in Texas too, Texas is also a non-voting state. It's a very, very, very low percentage of the state that actually votes and participates in elections. And there's very direct correlation between access to local news and civic participation. And so we think that's why we're launching free local news products in these communities, and they're taking off very quickly. But when it comes to the stories that they're asking for and that they're engaging with most, a lot of it actually has to do with, you'd be surprised. It's less about immigration. That's part of it. It's actually more about public education has been one of our biggest coverage areas that's driven the most engagement. There's a lot of really active debates in the state because public education funding is really, really poor in Texas. And these are the things that people weren't getting any reporting or content about, things that impact themselves, their children, their families. And so it's daunting because there are such large communities in that state and so much to cover and so little capacity and resources to do it. But I do also think that Texas, has been on the front lines of a lot of the agenda that we're now seeing being pushed on the rest of the country with this administration. And they have been living through the impacts of things like criminalization of abortion and abortion bans, and immigration issues and things of that nature. So I think it's a really important place for us to be paying attention to and also extracting stories from the ground to the rest of the country right now.
Thank you both. So I'm going to ask one more question before we move to the questions from the Q&A and the community. In my work, which focuses on young Americans, as we've discussed, many of whom are disillusioned with traditional media and prefer to get their content directly from individual independent creators, there are very legitimate concerns about mis and disinformation spreading from creators who don't necessarily have the traditional training as a journalist. But there's also opportunities that lie in this new environment and for both types of journalists to work together. I'm curious how you see traditional media and new media working together to reach an equilibrium moving forward.
I'm not sure we're going to find an equilibrium in the near term. I think we're all finding our way right now, as we've been discussing for the last half hour. There's just so much turmoil, change, tumult, if you will, in our news industry. I think those of us who do what we do, in whether it's, again, the NewsHour, Wall Street Journal, and these news organizations will continue to do their work as long as they can. And I know that more advocacy based journalism is certainly going to continue. It's not going anywhere on the right. And you can certainly tell from talking to Tara, it's growing on the left, and so there's going to be more of it. In terms of reaching young people, I think all of us who work in so-called mainstream media are madly trying to find ways to connect with the younger generation, knowing that they take in news and information in a completely different way. They don't sit in front of the TV set at 6 o'clock at night or 6:30. They're going to watch something on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and so on. So that's where we're putting our effort. For example, at the NewsHour, we're putting a huge premium on doing anything we can to go where news consumers are, no matter what their age. And so I don't know what the equilibrium will be. I'm just not sure we're going to find it anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't know if equilibrium is the goal either. I think what's really interesting that's happening, and I've seen this shift just in the past year, is that more legacy media and journalists that come from broadcast or print, et cetera, are actually starting to repackage or reproduce their great quality reporting into the formats. When I started Courier 6 years ago, it was really, really ahead of the curve to train print journalists how to make vertical video explainers for Instagram and then TikTok. We were a first mover on TikTok, and now our national account's one of the biggest media brands in the country on TikTok, which we're so proud of. We deliver over 100 million views a week. But a significant portion of that content that we deliver to younger audiences on that platform is actually just packaged content from programs like Judy's and cable news, like actually great quality journalism and opinion content that we didn't produce, that we're packaging for these audiences who aren't going to see it on the traditional mediums. And I do think that that was always a Band-Aid to some degree while they caught up. CNN is making massive investments in this right now. We are seeing more traditional journalists on these platforms. Substack now is full of them. And so I think we're actually watching the integration of these two, because what's always been really important to me is that we don't lose the most important tenets of journalism: fact checking, quality sourcing, integrity of the reporting. And so something else we're doing at Courier, beyond our own journalists who are all trained and educated and professional journalists, is we are working with local creators who don't come from journalism or politics or advocacy. Maybe they are personal trainers who built a huge trusted following in Arizona, or food critics who built a huge following on TikTok reviewing tacos. Like, we are working with them, paying them, of course, but paying them to actually use our reporting in their content for their audiences. So we're thinking about distribution in that way. They are now distribution channels to audiences we can't reach otherwise. And the coolest thing we found in working with them is that none of these folks who are not journalists, they don't want to spread misinformation or disinformation. They're so anxious about that. They want to understand how to know that the information they're giving their audiences is accurate, to your earlier point, Rachel, about looking for that stuff. And so we found ourselves building out trainings on the tenets of journalism for these folks that aren't, so they feel confident about putting good information and sourcing good information for them. So I do think it's happening. Again, it just goes back to the platforms and the decentralization of this. It's a volume game. And so we just need a lot more quality content flooding the zone, to take Steve Bannon's line. And for the past number of years, it really was the right flooding all those zones, and traditional media and the left not really playing at all. So I do think we're starting to see we're not at parity, but I actually feel really hopeful that we're getting closer.
Yeah, and I think, when I post a question about equilibrium, kind of something I've been thinking about is the way that traditional media organizations can work with creators, like you were suggesting in a way, Tara, as you're doing at Courier, to both share their information, have it be delivered through the content creators, maybe even hiring content creators to work at some of these newsrooms, or to have a collaborative post or a partnership in some way, so that both are incentivized to be sharing legitimate, truthful, fact-based news and information. Yes, maybe with a little bit of personality, but perhaps there are ways that they can be mutually beneficial to one another. And that's something that I hope we'll see more of down the line as well. To move now into the questions that we have from those who are on the call, there is a lot of interest, and I think perhaps because of Judy's legendary work, about the current status of funding for PBS and NPR. So I'm curious, Judy, if you can talk to us a little bit about the state of funding at PBS specifically, and what that dynamic looks like right now.
Well, I would love to be able to tell you the exact status of it. What I can say is that we know that the Congress has voted. We know the House of Representatives voted. The Senate has yet to vote on the rescission package proposed by the White House, and we're waiting to see. There's obviously been pushback by PBS, by NPR, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They've all filed lawsuits. We at the NewsHour are covering this as a news story. We are not out there ourselves advocating one way or another. We're covering it. And of course, our great hope is that we will be able to continue to do the work that we do. We have a wonderful, the good news is that we are able to do the work we do because of a collection of different sources of support. Much of it comes from foundations, from some of it from corporation. That part of the picture is much smaller than it used to be back in the day, when corporations would write a big check the same way they would sometimes for local broadcast, commercial broadcasting, I should say. Today, that doesn't happen. We still have some commercial backing. We're grateful for it, but none of it is the whole, covers the whole budget by any means. We get funding from corporations, and most important, we get funding from viewers like you. And if you send us a check, we're glad to send you a tote bag or a coffee mug. So we think that model has been a good one for a long time, and we hope it continues.
I think someone in the comment had also said that they'd be in favor of a giant fundraising campaign if the funding is pulled. So it seems that there's still people who want to keep giving. Okay, in terms of recently, someone asked, perhaps because of President Trump's lawsuits, it feels like some journalists don't counter obvious lies or pushback. And there was another question that was about how and why the media, in their words, is kowtowing to this administration. So I'm curious if you both have thoughts on that question, from two separate questions from audience members.
I can postulate on the second one a little bit. I mean, where we've seen media sort of capitulate or kind of cow to the administration has really been under duress. The administration's been really aggressive with lawsuits, and these have mostly been focused on corporate media that have other companies or deals they need to strike. You know, the most obvious being the recent settlement by CBS over the lawsuit from Trump, alleging that the 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris was edited in a biased and favorable way, which was entirely baseless. But he knew that the parent company and the owner of the parent company was trying to push a merger through. And so they cut a deal. And part of the deal that's been really unclear, I don't know if there's been even more recent reporting than something I was reading yesterday, because it's in dispute right now, was that as part of that deal, the company buying out Paramount agreed to give free advertising or underwriting airtime for conservative nonprofit causes and messaging. So it's really corrupt. And yet that's what's happening, is that this president is operating like a king who's brokering deals with people and threatening lawsuits and sometimes violence and other things if you don't just give him and the administration what they want. And it's been really, really upsetting to see some of these media companies cow so quickly, just like we saw big law firms cow so quickly to the pressure that was placed on them by Trump and the administration. Where there have been bright spots, even though it hasn't necessarily been successful, was, you know, the Associated Press really fought back when the White House took them out of the White House press corps when they refused to use Gulf of America instead of Gulf of Mexico in their reporting. And a lot of news organizations banded together to support that fight. I think ultimately, the AP lost that fight, but it's much harder for the administration to get away with these things if folks do band together and refuse to stand down. It's much more difficult to protect media in this country when we have really, really big media institutions immediately settling or cutting deals. How are they going to restore or rebuild trust with audiences? I'm pretty sure that's them kind of throwing the towel in on that objective.
Judy, do you have any thoughts that you want to share on this?
Well, just that it's been a painful period. It still is a painful period to watch what's happening. I'm not in a position to comment on any of the legal settlements that were reached between the administration and news organizations. It does feel like we're in a new era, if you will. This is not the kind of thing that I've had experience with in my 54 years of reporting on American politics. I will say this, that I think all of us in the media would do well, not just because of this, but in general, to be as transparent as we can about the work that we do. I think in the past, often it feels as if the reporting is done behind a veil, behind the curtain. Some of that's necessary because you need to talk to people if you're doing important reporting who don't want their names out for various reasons, but they have information to share that has consequences for the American people. And so that kind of reporting goes on in Washington all the time. But to the extent that we can be transparent, telling people what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we edit the way we do. I mean, there is a selectivity to news. It's why I never say that I'm objective as a reporter. I try to be as fair as I can, but I'm a human being. My work is the sum total of who I am as a person, trying to do the best job I can. But there is a subjectivity in the stories that we cover, in the quotes we choose to use. What is our lead? How long is the story? When it comes to television, radio, how much time do we devote to that story? There are decisions that we make, and so I think I don't mean we have to explain every single decision we make, but I think it's appropriate at times for us to share with the audience, with our viewers, with our followers, with our readers, why we do, how we do what we do, and why we do it. I think that would serve everybody well.
It's a really important point. Thank you so much. Another really interesting question that was thrown into the chat is about asking for thoughts on developing a Big Tent channel that might include news professionals from the left, the right, and the middle, who could bring their audiences together and offer exposure to different perspectives of the same issues to a wider audience, rather than being stuck in echo chambers or silos that social media algorithms promote. Do either of you have thoughts on that, what that could look like if it's feasible?
I think we need Kitty to weigh in.
I'm blanking on what it's called, but there is a site I'm aware of that actually tags all of the news stories, all of the reporting
All
about
sides.
the news story, all sides, right? Where they'll give you the left's headlines, the right's headlines, et cetera. I don't know how comprehensive it is, but I have heard of that.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have sort of a town hall like this, but where different perspectives, different news creators of sorts are brought together. I know there's been a lot of efforts like that to bring politicians to the table, but it would be interesting to bring creators to the table and have them debate one another as well, and bring their audiences to watch at the same time.
And showing where we have common ground. I think that's one of the most important things.
Totally.
Exactly, which is missing now so often.
Totally. There was a question, I know we talked about, obviously, we know the funding of PBS. There's a question for Tara to talk a bit briefly about how Courier is funded.
Sure. So Courier is a public benefit corporation, and we have a diversified funding model. So it relies heavily on underwriting. So mission-aligned nonprofit organizations and individuals will give us funding to expand our coverage of certain coverage areas like reproductive rights and freedom. A lot of our states have abortion bans, and we were covering those fights in the state houses, climate change, the economy, et cetera. And underwriters don't influence the journalism. They don't get to see it, review it, approve it, et cetera, before it's published. But then we have traditional. We have sponsored content where advertisers can pay for us to create content that is clear with their messaging and very, very clearly labeled that it's sponsored content on social. And in our newsletters, there's sponsored content opportunities. We are now the third largest local newsletter network in the country after Patch and Axios Local. And so that is an area where we are starting to build up more revenue. And then we also take grassroots donations from people who just love our newsletters and our social media products. And that has grown steadily over the past 6 years. So, I think that any news organization or media company today has to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall and find the revenue streams that work for them. We're also doing events now and bringing in sponsors for national events and local events in our states. We just did one in North Carolina with veterans in rural North Carolina, where the governor was also there. And so, you just have to keep trying. I do believe that any good quality journalism in America has to be subsidized in part by philanthropy from here on out, because of the way the attention economy has really lent itself to whatever rage bait, conspiracy theories, whatever garners human interest, et cetera. It's not about what is quality or factual anymore. It's about what drives the most engagement and eyeballs and views. And so to compete with that, we need resources that aren't dependent on what drives the most eyeballs. And I think that's the real challenge in terms of the business side of media.
And I would give a shout out to the foundations out there that have been in the forefront. The Press Forward group, the Knight Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, and others. Is an organization called the American Journalism Project that has pulled together different foundations, different. The whole effort is to try, as you just said, Tara, to try to get people to understand that it is, like the opera and I started to say baseball, like causes that people would give money to support the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, all of which are worthy, and people have to make decisions about what to support. But today, the news media, journalism, is now in the category of an institution that needs philanthropy to survive.
Thank you both. Okay, my last question for both of you is to ask about AI. There's been a lot of comments in the chat about that. I'm curious to the extent that both of you have noticed, Judy, in the organization, Tara at Courier, how and if AI is changing what you do and how you do it.
Well, I'll just say very briefly at the NewsHour, it is, we are certainly aware of it, and especially our folks on the digital side are very aware of it. We've done a good bit of research, investigation into how it can enhance the work that we do. But we also view AI as a concern. Clearly, we've covered it as a coming phenomenon, both the good of it and the worry, the threat of it. And so in terms of incorporating it into our work, I would say at this point, it's minimal, but that train is coming down the track. We can hear it already off in the distance, and we know it's coming, and we're trying to be prepared for it as best we can.
Yeah, AI terrifies me, as it should terrify all of us. I have started to read far too much about it. I use it lightly. At Courier, we have a policy where we are encouraging our teams to use it for research and sourcing, but everything has to be fact checked. It is still all very flawed. All of it is. And so you can't believe everything that comes out of AI. There's a lot of reporting about that. Even now that it's replacing search and it's changing the ability for folks to find good information because they're just now reading the AI synopsises on Google, and those are not always factual. So it's really frightening. So at Courier, our policy is that anything that is used AI has to be fact checked and has to have a human editor lens on it, even if it's using a video tool or something before it's published. That's really important to us and also to our journalists. We're never going to replace their jobs with AI. I want to end on a positive note about it, though, since that's the last question, is that I am an eternal optimist. I have to be. But I do think that AI, like any new transformative technology, can be used for good and can be used for evil. I'm much more scared about the people who are in the AI arms race and who are on the dais at the inauguration as the ones who are sort of leading in this revolution for AI. But I do also believe that as humans, we are always going to seek out human connection. And we've been able to do that online. But I think that with what is called AI slop and a massive increase in volume, that's only going to get bigger and worse and harder to tell what's real and not in terms of video and audio content. There was just a news story this week about AI replicating Secretary of State Marco Rubio's voice to calls to foreign leaders. It's just going to affect everything. And my hope is that humanity will retreat back into more physical spaces and interpersonal relationships and trusted relationships with individuals as a result, because we are going so rapidly down the rabbit hole that technology is bringing us in. And I think we're starting to see that already with all of the stories coming out about mental health, mental illness, all of these concerns, suicide among young people. There's going to need to be a reckoning. And so my hope is that as AI sort of transforms everything, there is a return to trust and trusted messengers.
Thank you both. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you both so much. And I was going to pass it back to Kitty, but it's been an honor to moderate this. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I wanted to end on a high note and on a note of optimism and hope. We so appreciate the three of you and your conversation. So I just would love to know from each of you what is giving you hope right now, and how can those of us on the call who so care about journalism and truth in journalism, what can we do right now to help in that effort? And so, Rachel, I'll let you go first, just because you've done a terrific job moderating, and we're so appreciative.
Thank you. So what gives me hope is the young people that I talk to every day. As Kitty shared when she introduced us all, I write a newsletter called The Up and Up. It's on Substack, and it focuses on youth culture and trends. And as part of my work for that, I hold listening sessions and do reality check-ins very frequently with young people. I have a community of Gen Zers across the country and in all pockets of the country that I talk to, and that community is always growing. So two things: if you know any young person who might want to be a part of the Up and Up community, please send them my way. Your kids, your grandkids, your students, your neighbors, your cousins, anyone. Please, I would love to be in touch with them. And I think the most other important thing to do is just listen to the young people that are in your communities. A lot of young people are feeling really politically homeless. It's not that young people don't care. There's so much overwhelming news and information at all times that has shaped their entire upbringing that sometimes they don't know what to do with all of this information at this point in time. And it just takes listening to them to try to understand where they're coming from, their perspectives. So I encourage everyone to do that. And thank you all for listening and being a part of this conversation.
And
All right, Kara, you're next.
go ahead.
I'm going to end with you, Judy.
I'll make it really quick. Everybody has to read Rachel's Substack. It's brilliant. Please sign up for it. It's also young people, and it's just people that are staying engaged right now. Courier grew the fastest it's ever grown in the 3 months after the election. We added more than 2 million subscribers across our network. People want good information. They want to stay engaged. And everyone here on this call is an example of that. People who are not turning away because things are scary and hard and unprecedented right now, but are leaning in to figure out who has solutions, where are solutions, how can we be the solutions. We're seeing that everywhere, from people linking arms around their immigrant neighbors to people showing up on calls like these and showing up in the streets. We have to keep doing that because there's so many more of us who care about this country and care about making sure that folks are informed and that their rights are protected. And you can, if you look for it, you can find beautiful examples everywhere today. And that's what I look for when I am doom scrolling for too long.
And Judy, I just want to tell you, there were so many comments about you in the chat. Your magnificence, your dedication to our country and to journalism. And well, I just want to make sure you know the love was there for all of you, but Judy definitely was a standout. So anyway, so let us know what gives you hope, Judy, and then we will end it. Thank you.
I have to say, what gives me hope is that I've been so fortunate, so blessed to be able to travel around the country, as you said earlier, for the last 2.5 years, and will continue to do it through the end of this year, visiting communities everywhere. I mean, just in the past few weeks, I've been in Providence, Rhode Island. I just came back this morning from Bowling Green, Kentucky, flying in and out of Nashville. And everywhere we go, there are people on the ground who are trying their darndest to find ways to bridge our differences. And it doesn't mean in a Pollyanna way, they're not ignoring the fact that there are real disagreements over big issues, and people appreciate that. But what we're seeing is that there's an effort to restore some of the respect in our civic discourse and in the way we talk to and about each other. That gives me hope. We are finding that everywhere. I mentioned South Texas, the places we've been to just recently. We have plans to go to many more parts of the country. We've been to 30 states at this point. And it's the American people. I think this country, and we're about to celebrate our 250th, there's a reason we've been able to keep our democracy as long as we have. And to me, it comes right back to the American people themselves. And if we're going to find a way through this tumultuous and painful time, it's going to come from people who persevere and people who care about respect and who care about preserving our democracy. So that's what gives me hope every single day. And thank you so much for letting me be part of this conversation.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Judy, and for just sharing, who you're meeting around the country. I think it's a really great reminder for all of us that we're all in this together. And we're so appreciative to the three of you for taking time to be with us at Big Tent.